Okay, so we're live. Ja, herzlich willkommen zum Sound und Recording, zur Q&A-Session der Studioszene Sofa Edition. Heute sprechen wir mit Bob Clearmountain und Roger Robindor von Apogee. Der Roger, der das Marketing bei Apogee übernimmt, und Bob Clearmountain, der die Produzenten, der bekannte Produzent, der unter anderem mit sehr, sehr vielen Künstlern in den USA gearbeitet hat, der international bekannt ist und heute mit uns über das Thema Mix in the Box sprechen möchte und sich dazu bereit erklärt hat. Wir machen das Ganze heute in Englisch, damit wir uns hier untereinander gut verständigen können. Es sind auch international Zuschauer zugeschaltet über die Kanäle von Apogee, von Sound Service und To Sound und Recording natürlich. Und dann gehen wir mal rüber. So, first of all, thank you guys for doing this, for taking the time. It's a pleasure to talk with you. As I explained, Bob Clearmountain, you are a very famous engineer and producer. You've worked with Bruce Springsteen, Bryan Adams, Toto, Rolling Stones, and many, many more. And Roger, you are the marketing guy basically at Apogee, and there's a connection between you guys because Roger is sitting in Bob's studio actually at the moment on the West Coast, while Bob is on the East Coast, and we're in Germany. So basically, we got all the time zones covered in our Q&A session. And today we're going to talk about mixing in the box. And to mention this up front, there will be a giveaway. There's a giveaway of an Apogee Hype mic, and there will be a giveaway question, which we will talk about during this session. The question is that the Symphony desktop mic preamp emulations are based on which hardware units? It's the new Symphony desktop interface that just came out, and this will come up during our Q&A session. So keep an eye out for this one and send us the answer at, now it's a bit more complicated for the international guys, redaktion@soundandrecording.de. That's why we made this banner, so everybody is ready to send it in. So just note that. And okay, so I would say we just hit it off and start with the first question that I would like to ask you. So mixing in the box. You usually mix in your studio. We see this beautiful console, all this outboard gear behind Roger, and but sometimes it happens that you mix in the box, like a lot of people do nowadays. And the first thing I would like to ask you is when you approach a mix. So you usually get a rough mix from the client, right?
Usually, yeah.
And how important is that? So do you listen to it often, or do you listen to it in the background, so you make up your own mind, your own ideas about this song, or is it something that you use as an inspiration for your mix?
It's like pretty much everything you just said. I mean, it's I'll usually have it in the session, and so I'll A/B occasionally just to hear. I mean, first I'll listen through to the mix in entirety, just to get the sort of feeling and the vibe of what they're going for. And then I'll get a little more detail and find out what instruments they tended to feature and, vocal balances and things like that, just so that I can get it similar to what they had. And then I won't listen to it for a while, and I'll just do my own thing. And occasionally after a while, I'll go back and just check. And I'm always checking to make sure that my mix sounds better than their rough mix, because sometimes it doesn't. Sometimes I go, well, I listen to their rough mix, I go, well, why are they sending this to me? This is what they've done. They've already got a great mix. And so I'm constantly, there are times that I'm trying to beat their mix. I mean, a lot of times it is a rough mix, and so it immediately sounds better. But it's important to me that I achieve the same sort of feeling that the artist and the producer were going for. So it is important.
Yeah. And when you get files for mixing, do you usually get like full sessions? So you open them up, there are tons of plugins in there, and then basically this would be similar to the rough mix, given that you have all those plugins, or do you just get like the audio files in a folder, and then you do the setup in your DAW?
Well, it depends. I mean, we get all sorts of different things. Sometimes we'll get a full session. I try to tell people not to, to take all the plugins out and any automation out, because that's what I'm going to be doing. And I'd rather have their rough mix and kind of follow that and get the same vibe, and then do my own automation and my own sounds. I mean, so much of the sound is on the SSL, because I'm not mixing on that Neve that's Roger's sitting in front of. I actually have an SSL in my mix studio. And so much of it's on that, and I have real outboard gear. I have five Pultec EQPs. I've got a bunch of Uri 1178 compressors and some LA3As. I got all kinds, my own hardware, which I like to use. And I mean, I do use plugins once in a while. And I tell people, if there's a particular effect or a sound that you got on an instrument, like a distortion or something like that, we'll just print it, leave the track, and then print it on another track. So sometimes I'll use that, and sometimes I go, well, maybe I can do something like that, but maybe improve it in some way. And, but a lot of times I'll get sessions where, usually I have an assistant that sorts through it all, and so I don't have to do it. But there are many times when I don't have an assistant, actually lately, quite a bit, because a lot of times, because of budgets, I can't really afford to pay my assistant, and so I'll be doing it on my own, and I'll get a session with a whole bunch of like subgroups and crazy things. I don't usually have much of a use for subgroups, because I just assign, if it's a group of things that are all going to one place, I'll just assign them to the same output. And so they come up on a fader or a pair of faders. And so I prefer to get stripped down sessions, basic, with all the levels at zero. And, so it's more like a tape machine. Okay.
Yeah. Yeah, that was my next question, like the DAW preparation. So what do you prefer, what you like to get on as files for mixing, but then you already answered it. So deleting the automation, deleting the subgrouping, things like that.
If there's something that they like, they should just print that.
Okay.
Look, I really want this to be sound just like this, Okay, yeah. Fair enough. Also, sometimes I've gotten sessions where, I remember this one really great record, actually, that where they printed a delay on the lead vocal, right on the lead vocal track with the lead vocal. Okay. And it just didn't work. And I always do my own delays. I mean, I have a plugin that's what that's for, right? Usually they're stereo, and and I'll do all kinds of tricky things with the delays to make them more interesting. And so I said to them, look, I can't even mix this. You have to send me a vocal without any delay on it. You can send me that as a reference, so to give me some idea of, what you like. But I just can't even use something like that. Yeah. And not only that, but I usually de-ess the delay, so you don't get that coming back. Okay. And this thing was the most sibilant sounding. It was the most irritating thing. It's too bad, because the girl's voice is beautiful, and like, well, why would you even do that? It's such a beautiful voice,
Yeah, and then it's a lot back and forth, so changing audio files, reprinting stuff, so you get the right files for mixing, so that takes a lot of time.
Don't even do that, you know what I mean?
Yeah.
And that's a lot of times printing, people tend to like to print their effects along with the track when they're recording. I mean, some people do that, which in the old days, it kind of makes sense when you had a 24 track tape, and sometimes it kind of, I mean, I never was much of a fan of that. EQ is one thing and some compression, but to print effects like that, I mean, nowadays you don't have to print anything. I mean, you could just keep it dry, and there isn't any noise buildup. I mean, we used to do compression on tape, because if you did the compression later and added a lot of top end, it would just bring up tape hits.
Yeah.
But nowadays there's no tape hits, it's digital. So there's no reason to even do that. That way, then when you mix it, you can totally change your mind. You never know. By the time you get to the mix, the whole vibe of the song might have changed, but depending on what you've added to the arrangement. And so those effects that you printed originally might not even work anymore. So, why not just keep it in the box and keep it in your monitoring plugins and print without anything. Maybe a little bit of compression is okay, kind of helps. But other than that, I get these things that are printed with all kinds of stuff. It's like, oh my God, what do I do now? You can't get rid of compression. That's the thing. You can always add compression, but you can't get rid of it.
Yeah.
Now might be a good time to, since Bob brings that up.
Yeah, about the monitoring, right?
So I think one point that maybe Stefan said in German, but I'll reiterate in English, is really how much Bob's thinking, his practices influence us at Apogee when we're designing products. And that's kind of why I'm here in this live stream. So we are releasing today our Symphony desktop interface, something we've been working on really for quite a long while now. And it's really interesting how his thought procedure has affected how we design this product. And, specifically to that idea, our plugins that work with Symphony Desktop, the plugins can run on onboard DSP on Symphony Desktop, but our plugins can also run natively in your computer DAW using your computer CPU. And we call these our dual path plugins because they can run on both. And there are a few other interfaces that allow you to run the DSP on board, but their workflows really push you towards printing those effects. And, really the guy who gets affected most by that is Bob, when he gets people who've printed their plugin effects, and then he has to figure out what to do with it all.
Yeah.
And so I've got this little diagram where we do have onboard effects, and you can print with them. Our mic preamp emulation you can print. You can set up our plugins that run on the hardware, and you can print that. And it's really easy to do because people always want to do that. But we have this third option that we call dual path monitoring, and it allows you to use both direct monitoring with Apogee plugins, and it's super simple to set up. It takes a little while to kind of understand what's going on, but as a user, you open up a plugin in your DAW and you link that with your hardware input, and now you can do exactly what Bob wants, which is you want to monitor through your plugins. You don't want to print the effects.
Right.
On other systems, it's kind of hard to set this up, and on our system, it's literally as easy as opening up a plugin, linking it to hardware, and everything happens transparently and automatically in the background. So you can do just that, where you can monitor through your plugins. So I think the big, go ahead, Bob.
The link is just a button or something, right? On
exactly. It's just
in the plugin.
In the plugin in the DAW, you just say, hey, I'm using analog input number 1. And then once that's set up, but this is really specifically based on, Bob telling that he's getting more and more mixes where people are printing their FX. And so that's just one way we've really designed this kind of rather innovative system. So you can print if you want, and if you're confident enough and you know what you're doing. But if you're like, hey, I'm going to send this to Clearmountain, I'm sure I don't want to screw it up. We have another, super easy option. So just wanted to kind of jump in and give that feedback from us.
It's really just the best of both worlds. It's such a brilliant way to work, it seems to me. And not only that, but you can do this direct monitoring, so it's low latency monitoring with effects through the Symphony desktop while you're recording, but then you don't have to have that plugged in later. You could unplug it and just use the same exact plugin with the same exact settings in your DAW later, you know, and when you're on the plane or something like that, without having to connect anything up to make it work.
Absolutely. Yeah. We don't require our interface to be connected. That's a great point, Bob.
Yeah, and I think it's really, really great to have Bob at your side developing all those products, because for Bob, it's a win-win. So for Bob, it makes life easier, and for you, you get the valuable input, so you know how the workflow is, and so that's really nice.
I'll be right at your side, but I won't need this.
All right.
Virtually.
Notice that.
Hey, Stefan.
Apogee. Yeah. It says Apogee right now.
Oh, yeah. What might be fun would be, while we're talking, why don't we play one of Bob's in the box mixes? Just to,
absolutely.
It's always a great, it'll give us some context about all this. Yeah. So we brought in this fabulous young singer named India Carney, and she's just so creative. And we gave her a desktop and said, go at it. And then Bob did an in-the-box mix using mostly Apogee plugins. So this will be Symphony Desktop's launch video, and we're going to play that for you right now. So let's bring up the video.
It's from a famous Supreme song
from
the 60s.
Exactly. Okay. So, Dirk, if you want to bring up the video, and here we go.
I hear a symphony. I hear a symphony. Baby, I hear a symphony, a tender melody, pulling me closer, closer, closer to your baby. Then suddenly, oh, your lips are touching mine, feeling so divine, till I leave the past behind. I'm lost in a world that's made for you and me. Oh, I hear a symphony, a tender melody, pulling me closer, closer, closer to your arms.
Wow, that's nice. A goosebumpy mix.
Absolutely.
Thanks. I'd love to see it without the sort of jerkiness of the video. I don't know if on your end. On my end, it's kind of the sync isn't too good, but it sounded pretty good.
Right, it sounded good, and that'll be on our website very soon.
Right.
So that's the launch video. Cool.
Okay, great.
It's always good to put in context about what we're talking about. So that's Bob. That's your in the box mix.
Yeah, it's on my Clearmountain's domain. On there, not all the reverb, but the delays and all that kind of stuff.
Right.
Okay, so maybe we'll talk about that. So we talk about your use of plugins. I mean, like last time when you talked to Valdemar, you had this session, the Q&A session, and you talked about the Clearmountain's domain plugin. Mm-hmm. And said what's special about it, finding a way to use the workflows you use in the studio and put them into a plugin with all those neat little routing things, so that are hard to do in a DAW. And you put it into one plugin.
Right.
So basically, about the effects we've heard, if you when the reverb came in the beginning, then it really opened up, so making everything white and nice. Could you talk a little bit about that? So how do you approach this?
Well, that's it's pretty simple. I mean, it's some reverb, actually some of the reverb is Altiverb actually, but some big church or something. But the delay is like a stereo delay, and it they're slightly different times. So it's a quarter note delay, I think. It's either a quarter note or an eighth note. I don't really remember, but I should have written it down when I did it. But the delays are just offset by about 20 milliseconds between the two, and then they flow into each other, so they regenerate across. And then they go into another reverb, into a thing called our Roscoe chamber, which is one of the within the plugin, and then they also have harmonizers on them as well. So that sort of thickens up the delay. And there's this thing called blur, which is a bit of a distortion, which I use very little of it on this because, I was going for more of a clean sound, but just a little bit just to make it sound a little bit different. And but then it changes. So the first part with that droney sound is these long delays. And then the next part I go to which is really the preset I used is the live Rolling Stones preset, I think. And it's just a really short, it's like about 90 and 130 milliseconds or something like that. And so it's more of a very short slap kind of sound. And then it goes back when she goes lost in the world, then it goes into this back into that long delay again. And then it ends with more of the short delay. So it keeps changing as it's going through, And I tried to make it always something new coming up, happening.
Yeah, I think I imagine it's really difficult creating a mix that's not based on the usual band instruments, so you don't have your drums, your bass, your guitars, and some little keys here and there, but you basically have vocals, and then
just vocals,
harmonies, and you have to make it to put it into perspective and still create a full mix of it all. But I think it's really gorgeous. It's
thanks,
really great.
Thanks, Herbert. I mean, it was beautiful just to start. What she just sang just on its own. I mean, the rough mix was fantastic. It sounded really good. It just needed to kind of change. It didn't. It just was the same thing all the way through, and I just wanted to make it expand on it a bit. And I hope she doesn't mind. I added a little bass part at the very end section. I took it. I flew some bit in. I hope she didn't mind that I added to the arrangement a little bit.
Yeah,
right. So, during our last live stream, I played some examples from Clearmountain's domain. Just some little examples we had set up. And so with Symphony Desktop or Synths domain, we've actually come out with a new plugin called Clearmountain Spaces, which are the reverb spaces from Clearmountain's domain. So, Clearmountain's domain's kind of a really full-priced plugin. It has an amazing amount of features. We wanted to give people sort of an opportunity to kind of experience some of that. So we created this plugin, Clearmountain Spaces, and I have an example from it as well. And this plugin actually comes with Symphony Desktop. So here, let's take a quick listen to this. Here we go. So that's just a super short example, but as you can see, as Bob mentioned, these are the three spaces that are really his personal spaces. You have Apogee Studio, which is the tracking room here. Mix This behind me in the tracking room, and Mix This are the physical chambers in his mix room, and then Roscoe is that kind of huge space from an acquaintance's studio. And so it really just gives you the reverb part of Clearmountain's domain. And that is one of the plugins that comes with Symphony Desktop. So just wanted to interject that in there.
Yeah. Well, you talked about that the singer was recording herself, I think, with this Symphony Desktop.
Absolutely.
I think she was, yeah.
And there's one thing, I mean, a lot of people out there record with like smaller interfaces and trying to maybe only record vocals or acoustic guitar and not tracking a full drum set or something like this. There are two questions I have. One would be like setting the levels, so making sure that everything runs smoothly, you have enough headroom for working with it later on. If you maybe have a suggestion for that. So basically, if you give an interface to a singer and say, okay, record yourself, and they ask you, well, Bob, what should I look for? So where should I be careful? Do you have any advice?
Yeah. Just get as many of the little green lights on the meter as you can without having the red light up. That's basically it. You want to get as much as you can, but you just don't want to go into any overs. You don't want to go into distortion.
Yeah.
I don't think. If you want distortion, then use one of the emulations, or use the blur or something like that. You use a plugin.
Yeah.
Because that digital
not clip. Basically.
Right. Because that clipping distortion can be pretty nasty, and once that happens, you can't get rid of it. It's really hard to fix that.
Yeah. Well, with the analog distortion, that's the second point I wanted to get to. So if you're pushing a mic preamp on a desk, or if you're pushing a mic preamp, an external rack unit or something like this, you create a sound and add to the texture of the recording, basically. And as you said, there are mic emulations incorporated into the Symphony desktop, so the tone shaping already starts there. What do you look for when you set something like this? So what kind of preamps do you like to use for which kind of signal, and how hard do you drive it, or what should the saturation be like for your ears when you record something like this?
Well, for me, I usually go for the cleanest signal possible, because then I know I can do whatever I want with it later, and so I don't actually go. But I know that this is a real popular thing to do, to get a little bit of edge, a little bit of distortion, to push a preamp. I mean, some of my favorite records, you go back to the Beatles, there's a song called Savoy Truffle by George Harrison, where it's just my favorite all-time horn sound, where he just overloaded the EMI mic preamps, and it just gets this amazing distorted sound. And it takes a lot of balls to do something like that, especially if you're paying a horn section. I guess I could afford it, but I usually don't. But what's nice about the Symphony desktop is they've done a really clever thing with a couple of the preamp emulations, where you can link the input and the output together. So you get a proper output. You get your output level, and you set that, and now you can crank up the input level, and the output level comes down in proportion with it. So what you're doing is you're pushing you're starting to distort the preamp, but you're not having to make up the gain. You're not having to turn the gain down. It's doing that for you automatically.
Yeah, let's check out the
which is a great feature.
Yeah, I've got a picture of the emulation. If we can.
Yeah, there we go.
There you go. So as Bob says, here's our input gain. Here's our output fader, which is just like a fader on a console, and you've got this gain link switch,
right.
And operates a little bit like a guitar amp. Turn up the input, turn down the output for a little bit more saturation. But when that's linked, it does it automatically. So you can kind of push further and further into the distortion while maintaining a fairly consistent output level.
Yeah, so you're not getting digital. You're not actually getting clipping. But the preamp itself is just an analog type of distortion,
Right. Yeah. And so, important fact. Everyone, pay attention. So the first emulation you just saw is based on a Neve 10 series Class A mic preamp. As you can see, we got a bunch of them behind us, and it's a pretty classic choice because it is. So widely enjoyed when people are tracking. And then the second mic preamp emulation, again, that is built on board, is this is based on an Ampex tube mic preamp. So if we can show that quickly. Here we go.
Yeah.
There we go. So this is how the emulation shows up in what we call the Channel FX plugin. And this is based on a 50s tube mic preamp from Ampex. And 50s tube mic preamps, they overloaded really easily. And so, like you talk about the Savoy truffle sound, this would be a great way to get that kind of effect. And we even supply the line attenuator that you would need with a 50s mic preamp, so that you could record without it distorting. So the Neve is kind of a subtle warming and transient shaping, that you can push into distortion if you want. And the Ampex is kind of a warmer distortion that happens certainly earlier in your gain stage. So those are the two mic emulations that are part of Symphony Desktop.
Okay, yeah, I think it's a really clever thing. The keeping the levels and just listening for the sound and don't have any volume changes or something like this.
Exactly.
It's perfect. I remember this for my preamps. I always have to put on some pads, then I turn up the input, and then I maybe Pro Tools clip, so I'd have to turn it down again. And
it's like
that. So it's
like a balancing act, isn't it? You know,
yeah, absolutely.
Where this just deals with it for you.
Yeah. And you still have to listen to it and still have to think, okay, did it really get better? Is it too much or is it less? And if you want to go back, then you have to take out a pad or so. It's a little annoying. So, talking about the using distortion. So you said you usually record it rather clean and adding distortion later. So what are you using to add the distortion, and on which instruments do you typically use it?
Oh, geez, it depends. You know, there's so many plugins that are some great things that. Let me. I can't think of something. Well, the SansAmp I use quite a bit. The SansAmp plugins that works pretty well. I can kind of relate to it because it's kind of like a guitar amp, you know. Yeah. But there's the Devil Lock thing is pretty cool, and there's this thing called Air Distortion, which I think is an Avid thing. Actually, I'm not sure. Yeah. There's a decapitator which I use sometimes. I mean, there's a bunch of different. I just go through and just try a bunch of different things on. You know, sometimes I'll distort the drums on a snare drum or tom toms once in a while, or and then on a voice. I just did a project where the singer just always wanted his vocal to be distorted, and so I just went through and found stuff, you know, things like that.
And so what we did, and here's a great example where Bob first asked for some distortion on Clearmountain's domain, where we added the blur feature. And Bob, you have kind of a great visual image of how you depict blur, right? How do you? Yeah, well,
my idea of it is like if you go to see a rock show at some big place like Madison Square Garden or an arena or like a stadium or something like that, and the front of house guy's like overdriving the PA, so the PA is a little just on the verge of distortion, you know, starting to distort a little bit, and that sound is bouncing off the walls. It's bouncing off the back of the stadium or wherever, and this is an exciting sound. I mean, this is something that adds to the vibe of a rock concert. And so it's something I always wanted to try to capture in a studio recording, in a studio mix. And so that's why I like to distort the delays a little bit, because it kind of simulates that sound. Plus I'll add some harmonizers just to kind of thicken it up, and then add reverb to that, because that's what's happening in a big venue, like even a theater or any kind of a venue where you're hearing music. That just naturally happens. And so it's trying to sort of simulate that sort of thing.
Right. And so really our plugin development timeline is make plugins that Bob needs. Yeah. And so that really led us to the second plugin that comes with Symphony Desktop is the Symphony ECS channel strip. If we want to go to that, there you go. And up here we have this drive control. And this is the first time we've offered kind of saturation, you know, outside of Clearmountain's domain. And what we did is we started with that blur, and we added some of our other distortion tricks that we have kind of in our DSP library, and then also made the bandwidth adaptable. As you add more distortion, you have less and less high end, so it doesn't get, you know, too fizzy. And so the drive control in this brand new plugin is really, it's based on Bob's first request for blur and then taking it to the next step. Right. And then a few other things about this. It really is a channel strip. So you've got a pretty simple 3-band EQ plus a high pass filter. And then it has compression settings that were tweaked by Bob, kind of based on our library of DSP features. Bob played around with the kind of the compression parameters. He selected the ratios, the attack and release times for the compression section. And really the idea is you can use this plugin when you're tracking, and it's just a great way to get really fabulous results quickly. Because when you're tracking, you just want to dial up something quickly. You don't want to dive into some complicated plugin. So this is the other plugin that you get with Symphony Desktop, is the Symphony ECS channel strip. And as I said, it's got this drive control, which is kind of the first time it's been offered as a standalone function in an Apogee plugin.
And I'd just like to add that the look of it harks back to the original Apogee converters. The DA, I think it's the AD500 and the DA1000. It's very similar to so they're pulling from the long history of Apogee and going right back to the beginning and using just visually what the stuff looked like, because they're still proud of those devices.
Yeah, it reminds me of the Mini-Me interface I had like 15 years ago or something.
Right. Yeah. And that was a throwback to the earlier ones as well.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah. Well, that's really great. So when you're approaching a mix in the box, could you walk us through your workflow? So how do you start? Do you start by setting the levels or tweaking for like the first most important instruments for you with a channel strip or something like this? And at which point do you add the delays and the reverbs and things like that? So how do you usually go for a mix?
Well, I don't mix in the box very often. So normally I'm usually, like on that thing that we played, I'm trying to figure out how to do it. Like, how do you mix in the box? I've only done like 3 or 4 mixes in the box, and so it's like, okay, what do I do? Do I populate the screen with all the sends and with the send controls, and do I just put the same? I don't know. I really don't know. I mean, I'm so used to mixing on a desk where everything's just in front of me, and I don't have to set up anything really, or very little. It's all set up. And on that particular mix, I mean, I got a balance first, and then I kind of do it the same. It's similar to how I do it in the analog world, where the panning has a lot to do with it. I mean, that particular song, it was a bunch of stereo pairs of doubled vocals mostly. And the rough mix was just, everything was just left and right. And it wasn't that interesting. So I figured out, I tried to isolate each part and tried to see if some parts were coming in at different times and going out at different times. And so I kind of separated. You could hear this high part comes in on the left at one point, and there's a low part on the right. And just to make the stereo a little more interesting, I'm a real stereo guy, In fact, I'm a surround guy, to be honest, because I do a lot of surround mixing too. But and so I like to hear movement. I like to make it almost visual. So, these people are standing over there on the left side of the stage, and these people, this guitar player is on the right side of the stage, or wherever, just to make it look like a sound stage, almost like a visual thing, you know what I mean? And so that's kind of the first thing I do, is play with the panning. And not only that, but it makes it easier for me to distinguish each part. Once I know, okay, that's that. Here's that rhythm guitar part is on the left, and it's because I'm usually unfamiliar with what I'm mixing, and so that helps me sort everything out and remember what each thing does. And but then I'll just start to add effects. Usually I'll start with a vocal effect. I say, okay, where's the vocal sitting? Where does this singer live? Where does this character? It's not even necessarily the singer himself, but who he's singing about. Who is he? Who is the character in the song? Is he some guy, lonely guy in his bedroom, or is he a rock star on a stage, you know, in an arena. So I try to work that out, and it's a lot of times it has to do with the lyric of the song, and so then I'll try a bunch of different effects on them. Usually I'll go through 4 or 5 different things and reject a bunch of stuff, and then I might even change it once I put the mix together, go back to it, and then a lot of it's just whatever. You know, I don't just start with the drums and then go to the bass and guitars or whatever. A lot of times the drums are maybe in the middle or close to the last thing I worry about. I usually worry more about guitars and vocals and things like that to start with. And then, you know, drums are simple. I just go play around with them and I'll get a drum sound anytime. But it's just whatever strikes me. Each time I listen through, I'll hear something else. Go, let me just fix that keyboard sound. I got an idea for that. You know, let me see what I can do with this guitar sound over here. You know, It's kind of stream of consciousness. There's no set way of doing it. Sometimes I will start with the drums. I mean, occasionally, but I usually don't solo anything for too long. Like I'll go through and I want to hear what their contribution is to the overall picture. So I'll solo each thing to hear and to find out if there's any problems with any of them. But I won't spend too much time on that. I'm more concerned with the big picture and how everything affects everything else, you know, because all the instruments have to interact in a certain way.
Okay, great. Well, that's it's a really interesting thing. Like when you said thinking about the person who's singing and in what kind of situation they are in and everything. So it's a really cool approach, not to go open up a plugin, step through presets and think, okay, that's a small place, it's a larger space or something like this, and rather think beforehand and then look for the right stuff you want to add to it. So that's really cool. Yeah, absolutely. So how do you handle the master bus? Do you have like a master bus compression or EQ or something you use, and in what stage are you adding this?
Well, in the SSL, I use the SSL compressor, and for in the box, the closest compressor I've heard that can accomplish something similar is the Apogee Mod Comp, believe it or not. Their modern compressor is really good, really versatile, really extremely easy to understand, to set up, because you're just seeing there's each control right above the control. It's showing you exactly what that control's doing, graphically.
Picture.
And
sorry to interrupt. We got a picture of the Mod Comp.
Great. There you go. It's just fantastic. I mean, there's other compressors that kind of look like that, but there's something about this thing it's just so friendly to use, and it's easy, and it just sounds fantastic. You know, it's complete. You can get just about anything out of that thing. It's really good.
Yeah. And as Bob says, really the idea is when you change a control, you have a really clear visual feedback about what happens. So in some ways, it's a little bit of a compressor tutorial in its visual presentation.
Yeah. It is, because it shows you graphically what's being affected and what it's doing to the signal.
Yeah.
And it sounds good.
Yeah, most importantly.
Cool. Yeah.
And are you working with a master EQ?
No, I really don't EQ the bus.
Yeah.
Because to me that's confusing to me. My brain's too small to think about something. I just like to EQ each instrument individually, and I leave that thing for the mastering engineer, because I'm not a mastering engineer.
Yeah.
And I think as far as EQing the overall thing, that's something that somebody else should do who has a clear objective, clear perspective, I should say, because I'm too close to it to be able to do that. And I never really, I know a lot of guys do that, and they'll use these multi-band compressors and stuff like that for their stereo bus. And that kind of thing, to me, it's just, if I'm mixing into one of those, it's fighting what I'm doing. And every time I've tried a multi-band compressor on one of my mixes, it's always made it worse. It's never made it better.
Yeah.
Sorry about all this noise. A friend of mine's kind of coming over in a few minutes. He's let me know.
Okay. Yeah, and maybe one thing about using plugins, I just saw that Apogee put out some Pultecs, and I think they are based on, or they borrowed your units to create those Pultecs. So how do you use those Pultec EQs, and on which typical settings do you use those? So, for example, do you always reach for a Pultec when you do bass guitars or vocals or something?
I use them, well, mostly snare drum. You know, I'll usually do a parallel compression EQ where I'll have I'll mult the snare drum up onto 2 channels, and one of them will have a Pultec, and I have this one setting I always use. I hate to be boring, but it's usually 5K, fully broad bandwidth, and kind of, well, pretty much crank. No, it depends on how the snare was recorded. If it had been recorded with treble already, then I'll turn that down a little bit. But and then that'll be after like an 1176 or an 1178 compressor, and on a very fast release and medium attack time, and then the other one will just be, well, when I do it on the SSL, I'll just SSL EQ. And so I have a bunch of different things, and I'll balance those two to make it sound right to me. And but then guitars, I usually use the Pultecs for guitars quite often, because there's a way you can sort of brighten them, and piano too. Piano at 5K or 8K. For some reason, I almost always have Pultecs bandwidth all the way on 10, like really broad. They're more just like overall tone controls for me, but they're just so sweet sounding when you do that. I just love the way they sound. You know, one of the first things I ever used when I started back in 1972, because we had the studio I started in had these miserable recording consoles, and the EQs were useless. Yeah. And so I'd always pile up a stack of outboard Pultecs, because the studio had them all outboard. They had them all in separate boxes. And I come in early in the morning, gather them all up for all the other rooms, and put them all up there and put them on every track. Yeah. Yeah. Because the only way I could get any sound out of the thing.
Yeah. Yeah. I think we have an image, right? Yeah.
Right. And so it was important for us. One of the very first plugin we do was a Pultec, kind of based on Bob's experience. It's interesting because there's a fellow by the name of Steve Jackson, who is the president of Pulse Techniques, who is the manufacturer of Pultec hardware. And so he manufactures hardware, and he sent brand new units to Bob, or Bob's purchased a couple over the years.
I bought 2 of them, yeah.
Yeah, and so when we were doing the emulation for our software, rather than use a 50-year-old unit that who knows what shape it's in, we actually emulated a brand new hardware Pultec. And so in collaborating with Steve, he actually has licensed and endorsed our Pultec plugins as the manufacturer of the hardware. And so our plugins are the only ones that are officially licensed and endorsed by the hardware manufacturer. It's something we're really proud of. Yeah. But again, it's key to Bob's workflow, so we made one.
Yeah.
They did borrow my original Pultecs too, and compared the two. I mean, Roger would spend hours and hours analyzing both of them, and it's remarkable how close he got it. Right, the hardware ones are pretty much identical.
Yes,
to the originals.
Did listening tests, blind listening tests with EQ curves matched with an audio precision test set, and
the plugins are identical. Remarkable. The plugins are truly identical, to the hardware, which is upsets me a little bit because I spent a lot of money on these things, on the hardware.
I mean, it still holds up the value, so it's
Yeah, I think so.
Yeah.
Not worried about that.
And I also saw that there's an optocompressor that Apogee made for you, like it sounds. So on which instruments do you use this one, and how do you use it? Because it's like a simple version, I would say, with only two basic main knobs and just one switch to select the sound.
Well, it's very similar to an LA2A or an LA3A from Universal. And I've always preferred the 3A, so it looks more like the 3A. They're really similar, except I think that the 2A has tubes in it, and the 3A is all transistors. The 3A is a bit more reliable, I think. And something about the release time I prefer. It just sounds more musical to me. I don't know why, if there is a difference, but it's always sounded better to me.
Yeah,
and so they've emulated that, and for me it's great because I only have in my mix room I have 4 of the original LA3s, and if I have a whole pile of backing vocals, I just run out of them, and so it's so great to have the plug-in, and I could just like get a setting and duplicate it, and I can put one on every voice, that's fantastic.
So it's your main vocal compressor?
Depends on the for lead vocals. I'll go between that and my 1178, which is like it's like a stereo 1176. And for the real more rock stuff, like it's I tend to go with the 1178 because you hear the compression more, whereas the LA3A is so transparent doesn't even sound like compression, and yet it will control the level very efficiently. And so for ballads and most stuff, I'll use the LA3.
Okay.
Yeah. And I would say our mod comp covers very well the 1176 kind of more aggressive compression from a plugin point of view.
That's right. Yeah. That's exactly right.
Okay. So, well, I think since we talked about most of it, I would say I only have one last question, which would aim at tips for young engineers, aspiring producers coming up. If you look back on your career, what are the things you would like to have known back then that you know today? Or, do you have any tips for young guys out there?
Well, if you're going to do it depends on what part of the business you are. But for me, I am a musician, but that's not really my thing. I'm not a songwriter. I provide a service, which is mixing records, and I used to produce, but they were never my records, right? It was always someone else, and so. Just keep that in mind, that it's not your thing, especially if you're just mixing a record for somebody or engineering, that everybody has their opinions about what things should sound like and what things should be like. But if you're not the producer and you're not the artist, you can suggest things, but don't ever argue with anybody about, don't ever tell them that you think they're wrong. Because I did that a couple times, and one time in particular, and that producer never heard from him again. You know what I mean? I argued with him about how he wanted me to EQ an acoustic guitar, and I shouldn't have. I just said, okay, you want to do that? Fine. You want to add, low frequency shelf to your boomy acoustic guitar? If that's what you want, then that's fine. But and so, you know what I mean? It's like figure out what the producer and the artist, try to get into their head and figure out why they're asking for what they want. And no matter what you think, and no matter if you think they're totally wrong, there's a reason they're asking for that. And it's probably an artistic reason that maybe you not quite getting, or maybe you just disagree. Maybe they are wrong, but it doesn't matter. It's their product, and they're paying you to do your job. And and do it the best you can. Try to make their idea your sound as good as you can, and try to go for their vision, not your own vision.
Okay.
And
Great.
that's about it. And the other bit of advice, which I like to give, is for people, a lot of people go to school and they're not really sure what they want to do or what part of the business they want to do, who they want to be, what their career is going to be. Well, try to figure out what you're good at, right? And hopefully what you're good at is what you like doing. And if it's not, well, just learn to like it. Whatever it is that you're best at, focus on that. Don't try to be who you're not. Don't try to, if you're not good at something, because I wanted to be a producer. And I finally at one point realized, wow, I'm not that good at being a producer. I'm pretty good at mixing records. So I said, I'm not, why am I killing myself trying to be a producer? I'm going to concentrate on mixing. I can make a career out of that because I'm a whole lot better at that.
Yeah.
And, find out what you're best at and concentrate on that. That's my advice.
Okay, great.
I'm sticking to it.
Absolutely.
So if I would interject, so from Apogee's point of view, we are now shipping this beautiful unit, the Symphony Desktop.
It's really cool.
So much of Bob's collaboration. It's probably the most technically advanced product that we've ever made, and has our flagship conversion. So we're super excited about shipping it. The German distributor who set this all up, we thank very much. They are Sound Service.
Yeah, thank you.
sound-service.de. And we're very proud to say Symphony Desktop is now shipping.
Great.
Okay, yeah, for all
It's
you
really
guys
cool.
out there, check it out. I really, you get some plugins with it, and the whole preamp emulation thing is awesome. The workflow is awesome, so I think I will also look into that. Yeah, and for the people who kept their eye out for the preamp emulation and for our giveaway, so maybe soon there will be a hype mic on the way to you if you send an email to redaktion@soundandrecording.de, and also. To keep a lookout, we are doing those sessions quite regularly, and there's the Studio Szene coming up in December, on the 11th and the 12th of December, where we have all kinds of seminars virtually, so you can check them out online. It's all going to be streamed live. There are English seminars. For example, Michael Brower will be joining us and talking about his approach and his workflows. And so we would like you guys to join. Thanks again, Roger. Thanks, Bob, so many times for doing this. And it was a real pleasure talking to you guys.
Pleasure talking to you too. Thanks so
Thank
much.
you very much. Thanks very much.
Okay. So,
Signing
Bye
off.
now.